Right, so welcome everyone to this Transforming Eco-Anxiety workshop. This is one of 3 workshops I'm doing this summer because I just think it's a really important issue. It's something I've been becoming increasingly interested in. My background would be in activism and change making, and particularly global citizenship education for 20, 30 years, depending on how you define it. And also in well-being. I run singing workshops, holistic well-being work, and I suppose it's my attempt to tie the 2 things together. I've also done a little bit of training in the work that reconnects, which some of you are familiar with, and forest bathing. So I bring a lot of nature connection and also indigenous wisdom into my work. So this workshop is to give people tools and get discussions started. And it's also just to give you a flavor of an 8-week course that I'm offering in September. So I'll maybe mention more about that at the very end. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for signing up and being here. I think some of you have already written your name, where you are, how you found out about that in the links in the box. That's great. Thanks a million for that. So what to expect? So we're going to look at coping with climate or eco-anxiety. We're going to learn 2 exercises that can help reduce anxiety, and looking a little bit about action taking, but it's not the only thing we're going to look at in terms of how you can alleviate anxiety. So, taking action is a sort of a go-to for many people, but I think it's actually a bit more complex than that when we're dealing with eco-anxiety. But we will look at ways of approaching action. So there's a lot to cover. So firstly, I think it's always important to resource ourselves before going into something that's potentially anxiety provoking. Even though we're looking at alleviating anxiety, it can be a big topic to look at. So before we look at the more painful stuff, let's remind ourselves of what we do have. So I'm going to invite you to do this either alone on a piece of paper or just to yourselves, or else you can put your answers in the Zoom, in the box, in the chat box. If we were doing a longer workshop, I would, have you do this out loud, but because it's a shorter one, let's just do this alone. So something that makes, in the natural world, that makes you feel alive is, something you're grateful for in your life is, and something you appreciate about living in Ireland is. Thank you for contributing there. Let's have a look at some of yours. So everything in the natural world, something that Justin is grateful for: family, beautiful scenery and wildlife in Ireland. The sound of the trees in my garden make me feel alive. The ocean, animal, family, the mountains, local flowers, the sea and sea swimming. A lot of people mentioned that one. The natural world, the sound of the wind, sound of the waves, family, the freedoms in Ireland, yeah. I know we give out about Ireland, but there's an awful lot to be said for being in this part of the world. And others as well. Peaceful country, absolutely, yeah. So there's loads of things. It's nice just to reflect on those things. So let's move on to eco-anxiety. So sometimes eco-anxiety is talked about like, depression, or, sometimes it's treated as a condition or a neuro, and it's not recognized as a mental health condition as such officially, but it is recognized as something that is causing increased distress, with many people in all ages, particularly young people. But at the same time, I feel it's really important not to pathologize it and not to act as if, oh, there's something wrong, I have eco-anxiety. I mean, eco-anxiety is a completely healthy response. I think people who suffer from eco-anxiety, it's a side effect of being sensitive, being caring, empathetic, open, being attuned to the world. So in a way, it's an opportunity to, it's like it's a wake-up call, if you want to put it like that. It's like a sort of sign almost from the world to us that we are involved in the world, that we're part of the world. And I would be almost more concerned with a lack of eco-anxiety, which is not really necessarily that people don't care, but it can often be people are numb. People just haven't let it in. So if you're feeling anything because of the state of the world, it means you're alive, you're healthy, you're responsive. So in a way, it's something to embrace and treat as an invitation to move deeper. And at the same time, whether we feel eco-anxiety explicitly or not, I mean, this is such a difficult time to be alive, isn't it? I mean, I was in the cinema the other day, and there was literally this ad, "Don't use extinction." And you're like, shit, I went to the cinema to relax or whatever, and I'm reminded of possible impending extinction, which I'm all up for these ads existing, but it's yet another reminder of how mainstream that concept of impending doom has become. And that's hard for people, and I think we don't acknowledge it sometimes, how hard it is for all of us, and we don't talk about it enough. Has anyone seen that ad, by the way? No? Yeah, I think it's a new ad. It's sponsored by the United Nations Development Programme, which is a good move, really. So what I wanted to do with this workshop is very, very, very briefly look at the big picture of where we're at, but really focus in on the eco-anxiety. But in terms, I've literally 2 slides on the big picture, one of which is this quote from Einstein saying, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And I think that's where we've gone wrong. Like if we're experiencing eco-anxiety now, it's because nothing has really been done things have been done over the past 30 or 40 years since climate change became a big thing, but it hasn't succeeded because emissions are still rising. So that's why we're all nervous about what's coming down the line. Had we acted with success, we wouldn't be facing what we're facing now. And I believe that it's because we've clung to the same values, the same system, the same cultural ideas, and just put a veneer of green consumerism or green stability over that. Sustainability we don't really look at it as a new way of living. We look at it as a few changes in how we live. And briefly, I think we can delve into a sort of thing of, the world would be better without humans, and humans are all doomed, and we're all selfish, and we're all flawed, and this is just the way it is. And even as environmentalists or human rights activists, we can get a little bit sort of down on being human. But actually, if you think about Homo sapiens, we've been around for between 200 and 300,000 years old. The vast majority of that time, we've lived close to the earth, treating the earth as sacred, living within ecological natural boundaries. And it's only in the last it depends on which way you look at it, 10,000 years maybe since agriculture, 4,000 years since empires, 50 years since neoliberalism. So it's intensified as it gets to these times, we get more and more destruction. So capitalism and colonialism, then capitalism, then neoliberalism. So really it's just in recent history we've messed everything up. So our current dominant culture sees the earth as an inanimate ball of rock. We see us as being over plants and animals and all other life forms. We see nature as a resource. There's a huge emphasis on wealth and status, even within sustainability. So electric cars are marketed as luxurious and fast, and they're marketed with status in mind, so extrinsic values. People are seen as separate, independent, and autonomous, whereas before the last few thousand years, everyone believed that the earth was sacred. At least all archaeological and other evidence suggests that that was the case. The earth was treated as a sacred animate being. Plants and animals were seen as intelligent, or are seen still by many cultures, respected, sentient beings. Nature was revered, is revered sometimes, protected, treated with respect. There's an emphasis on responsibility rather than entitlement, an emphasis on continuity, collectivist and cooperative values, and everybody's seen as a web rather than a hierarchy. So these are some of the issues that I think are at the core of why we haven't succeeded in changing. So we're going to do our first, before we look more into eco-anxiety, the first of our 2 somatic exercises. So this one is a really fast way to shift our nervous system from a sympathetic, which is aroused, fight or flight kind of a state, which a lot of us are in most of the time, unfortunately. And it shifts it into a rest and digest, healthy, relaxed mode. We're going to look at eco-anxiety. So eco-anxiety or climate anxiety is like a catch-all phrase, but actually there's a huge number of other emotions that we feel when it comes to the ecological crisis. I've written a few of them here. So fear, anxiety comes in under fear, but there's a continuum. It could be terror, panic, overwhelm. Then on the anger continuum, it could be just annoyance, frustration, all the way to hatred and rage. Then in terms of sadness, we have grief, we have despair, we have loss, we have guilt, and that's could be a feeling of pressure or even shame, those kind of feelings. So I'd love if you could have a little think, how do these show up? How do they influence our thinking and our actions? So in terms of fear, it can be things like being really afraid of, say, if you feel like the sector you work in, say if you're a dairy farmer or whoever, you might be feeling fear that you'll have no money, that your income is going to be lost. And that's just one example. And often when we're feeling that fear, we become defensive of our little piece, and we don't think of the bigger. And I'm not pointing any fingers, but it could be whatever fear we feel. Sadness, so sadness at what we've lost, what we will lose. Anger about people who do this, do that, do the other. And this is a really tricky one because I really think it can harm our ability to move forward with activism, is when we are blaming the non-vegans, blaming the SUV drivers, blaming the litterers. And even when it comes to rage, which is kind of more aptly directed, like to corporations or governments, we can become blinded by that in a way, or we can become narrow, tunnel visioned, even if it is more justified. So kind of anger going all over the place, and really loss of energy as a result. And then guilt and shame and pressure, I don't do enough, I should be doing more activism, I shouldn't be driving, I shouldn't be flying, I feel really bad about what I do or don't do, all of those kind of feelings. So there's a lot going on, and I think if you notice on social media, especially, people get into corners, and there's debates happen, but people tend to the emotions are behind everything we say and do, aren't they? They're just at the back. So not being aware of the emotion can lead to miscommunications or communications that aren't as constructive as they could be. So knowing about what we feel and how it motivates us, how it shapes our action or inaction is really important. So what I'm going to do is get you to have a chat about that at the end. So bearing all of that stuff in mind, we'll come back to that in a minute. But in the meantime, number 2 of our ways to cope in terms of our somatic practices. So this one, I did a training in Capacitar, which is an international approach. Basically, it's a holistic well-being practice, but it specifically has been taught to grassroots leaders over the years in countries where they've got trauma or civil war, poverty, natural disasters, and all of that kind of stuff. And they're gradually, Capacitar, doing more and more work in terms of climate disaster and eco-anxiety. So this exercise is based on Eastern concepts of meridians, and it's really simple, but it really is quite effective in terms of overwhelm. And just to flip forward to this other slide first. So for me, eco-anxiety can manifest in these hugely strong emotions, which feel quite overwhelming, which is where the somatic work comes in and the ongoing self-care. but it can also be not so much strong emotions in the here and now, but a sort of lingering feeling of what's the point and what's the future, and just sort of nagging worry. Nothing that you can't contend with from day to day, but just a sort of a drain on you and on your energy, and just sort of, it might pop up. You're having dinner with friends and suddenly you're like, yeah, but what's the point of it all? Or, it can kind of come out when you least expect it. And that's for me where the inner work or the psycho-spiritual work comes in, coming to terms really and shifting your perspective. So there's the managing the strong emotions, the stress, the anxiety that are feel bubbling up and they're hard to contain. And then there's the ongoing shifting your perspective, getting used to the world we live in, changing our expectations. And then there's the third prong out of my little formula. The third one is taking action, but really taking wise action is important. So we're looking at the first one here, the self-care tools for overwhelm. And going back to our finger holes, this is a really good exercise for that. So we have 5 fingers, and what we simply do is hold each of the fingers for the emotion. So you wouldn't have to do all 5. You would choose the one that you're feeling at that very moment. But we're going to go through all 5 as a practice today. So that was a really, really fast run through. You might have felt a little bit rushed and sort of, I'm not saying that you could just muster up those feelings. That really what that exercise would be used for is when you do feel the feeling and you are feeling the intensity. And it really helps just to, I think we all know, or a lot of us are aware that we should allow the feelings to be, but it's sometimes hard because we come in with judgments about, why am I feeling that? Should I be feeling that? Surely I should be feeling something else. And we don't allow the feeling to be. So even if you use that exercise just to allow yourself to notice the feeling, name the feeling and breathe through it, it can be really helpful. So you may or may not have got something out of simply going through it quickly. I hope you did. But yeah, let's pop in the chat if you have any comments. That'd be great. So we just looked at this a minute ago. So yeah, for me, there's 3 things we have to look at: managing the day-to-day emotions and stress through these kind of tools, doing the inner work, and taking action. So I have 7 approaches drawn from various different books, trainings, my own thinking, observations. So I've run the Zero Waste Ireland Facebook group for I think around 6 or 7 years, and there's 15,000 people. So looking at that several times a week has given me a big insight into how people do when they get into sustainability. And I've seen how some people get into trying to make individual changes, consumerist changes, and how that can actually not necessarily make them feel any better. It can actually lead to its own sort of overwhelm and all sorts of other experiences as well, where they feel empowered by what they can do. So I've had 7, and then plus I've run workshops on these issues in person with people all over the country for 10, 15 years. So I've really been able to see how people deal with trying to change the world. And these are what I've observed, these things. So this one is kind of like it's popped up in the last few years for me, is that idea that we can waste so much energy wishing things were different or imagining that everything's going to be fine. Like even if we took all the action that countries have pledged to do today, it wouldn't really be enough to curb changes that we will face, in terms of climate chaos and ecological systems breaking down. So we need to, it's really hard, but I think there's a certain amount of wisdom in accepting that and not surrendering as in being passive and allowing it to happen, but not wasting energy on trying to change the inevitable, and also using our energy to look at the future and go, well, what's actually going to change? What may our lives look like? And making ourselves more robust in face of that. So being conscious about cultivating resilience, whether that's an inner sense or actual changes in our lives that make us less likely to suffer, And I think when it comes to this is a sort of the psycho-spiritual work, and Buddhism really helps. If you want to, most of you, I'd say no, or if you don't, look up Joanna Macy's work. So her work draws a lot from the Buddhist idea of impermanence. So everything is changing constantly, not attaching to, say, for example, in the West, we have had peace and stability, and a lot of us have experienced material luxury and comfort for a long time, but that maybe was never gonna last forever. And taking a deep time view, in terms, instead of thinking 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, it's more like generations and lifetimes and ecological or geological eras. So a hugely vast, different type of view of time is good. Then I think in terms of our emotions, we need to embrace those emotions that we have and transmute them, transform them into constructive responses insofar as is possible, and just accepting them as well, not trying to hide from them or think that we're weird for having them, not sharing them with people. So the, fear turning to courage, anger into protecting, grief into falling in love even more with the world, and guilt into sort of knowing, okay, well, look, this is the amount of free time I have, this is the energy I have, this is the money I have, these are the changes I can make, these are the things I can get involved with, and then accepting that and not beating yourself up for things that you can't do. So I know there's a lot in there where I'm flying through this, but in a nutshell, it's don't be afraid of your pain for the world. And yeah, each emotion can be a blessing and can fuel change in your life. And then I think, judging by your gratitudes at the beginning, this is something that a lot of us have already started doing, is really being in the moment. If this is all going to change, well, let's enjoy it and not feel guilty for taking time in nature, really communicating with nature, noticing our breath, appreciating our bodies, just that, literally being in the moment and being grateful for that moment. Again, so this is their inner work, resourcing ourselves, stems a lot from mindfulness as well. And then I've seen a lot of people tie themselves in knots about going green, and trying to get that bamboo toothbrush and trying to run around in their car all over the city trying to get that biodegradable dental floss or whatever, and then they get so worked up and so fed up that they end up going on holidays for 2 weeks to Turkey with their family. It's kind of like, well, at the end of the day, like, I do believe in personal changes, but I don't think it's not the big picture. It's not the be all and end all. There's too much emphasis on it, in other words, and it's a lonely kind of road. And when you're already stressed with life, it's going to add to your stress load. And I'm not saying, oh yeah, give up and just buy loads of other shite. I'm just saying that the little green consumerist shifts that we can make aren't really where it's at in terms of creating a new sustainable way of life on the planet. But every little that you can do is great, and pat on your back for whatever you do. But also that deeper stuff of, like, the myth of our society is that the more we consume and the more status we have is the happier we're going to be. And knowing that that's not true. And if we are going to face into some kind of collapse, what do they call it? Supply chains collapsing and our system changing and all of that. Well, what's of value? What do we not need to cling on to? And I think, if you've heard of the concept of degrowth is when you deliberately stop growing the economy and look at winding down the economy. I believe this is what we should be doing now, rather than waiting till things can go completely belly up and then it's all chaos. So questioning all the advertisements that we're subjected to, but even questioning, or wondering, can we spend a little bit less time earning, so that we don't have to. If we're not earning, we're not spending, we're doing more simple things. So moving to a simpler life, focusing on your intrinsic needs, which are your true human needs for belonging, connection. Obviously, we need material stuff as well. I'm not being, completely naive about the expense that we're living through at the moment and rent costs and all of that. So some people, they don't have any wiggle room. But I do believe we do put pressure on ourselves to maintain a certain standard of living. And then, if you haven't already, I would really recommend the regenerative movement, which goes beyond sustainability and looks at sort of repairing the damage we've done. The next thing I would point to is breaking the silence. So I don't know if you agree, but it's almost still a bit taboo to say my heart is breaking for the loss of, the plant species or the animal species or the roadkill or the fact that trees are being knocked down every day or what's happening in the Amazon. We can talk about it, but we tend to talk about it in a slightly intellectualized way, or getting angry, and that's acceptable. But, we don't really show our grief or share our grief, I don't think, with each other as readily as we could. And especially when it's a risk and you kind of try to talk about these issues to people don't necessarily share your point of view. So I think there's an onus on us all just to sort of matter-of-factly say it to people. Oh yeah, I'm really, really depressed about this. Even if it's a randomer, a neighbor, a friend, somebody, an acquaintance. So breaking the silence about what we really feel is really important to normalize these concerns in our society. I haven't seen them happening live in Ireland, but climate cafes are a really great one for people to sit down and talk about this stuff in a contained way. So let's break the silence. I'm kind of running through because I want to put you in groups now. So envisaging the world we want. So, we do come across a lot of apocalyptic scenarios in popular culture, films, books, that kind of stuff. And I think, talking for myself, it's always lurking in the back of my head. I wish I never saw them, but films like The Road and all of that kind of stuff, these terrible things that you might think can someday happen. But really, we don't know what's ahead of us. And why don't we acknowledge that those are risks and those are concerns, but also cultivate, geez, what kind of world do I want? And getting excited about the possibility of building a world and an economy based on well-being, a sharing economy, a world where our food systems are close by. All of that stuff is within reach. All of the technologies and knowledge has been there for thousands of years in the case of many, indigenous approaches. So it's all within grasp. It's just a question of our will and our enthusiasm and our imaginations. So yeah, spending time envisaging the world we want and then getting active, but not just making little consumer shifts in your life, because that's limited in the amount of change that will make happen in the world, but also it's lonely and it's frustrating because there's almost nothing we can buy that's ethical, really. So getting active, but doing stuff with others. So not focusing on what all of these other people do or don't do, but just sort of looking at what's around you, especially community stuff, because I believe that if we get to know the people in our communities and our estates that are active locally, maybe beach cleanings, repair cafes, swap type stuff, all of that builds connection locally. And when things get more precarious, which they inevitably will, if we all have more connected communities, we will be more resilient and things will be less scary. And another thing I often think of is, the way sometimes Friends of the Earth or these campaign groups, you might not be able to attend a protest, or you might not be able to send a TD letter or whatever, or you might get sick of doing them. But I think for me, I did a lot of singing work during the pandemic and sent all the money to ecological campaigns and stuff around the world and in Ireland. And that was great because I didn't have to go to the protests or write the letters. I mean, I do that anyway, but it's just a way of supporting, doing something fun that you love doing, but supporting campaigning organizations. It could be a dinner, inviting people around for dinner. Listen, let's all stick a tenner in the hat, have a really nice night and send it to Tree Sisters or, whoever you believe in. So my thing for activism is stuff that feeds your needs. I think we have too much in our society of focusing on our material needs, not enough on our inner needs for belonging, community, connection, meaning, beauty. So if we can, fill our needs while making a difference and building our resilience, that's tick, tick, ticks all the way through. So I hope that little chat was useful. I thought it might be good to invite you to share, maybe some of you to unmute, maybe 3 people, different groups, just to give us a tiny, teensy little flavor of anything that stood out in that chat. Would anybody like to share?
Yeah, I'll go first if you want.
Thank you.
We just had time to talk between two of us, and our third person was on chat. She didn't have a mic, so I'm sorry we didn't get around to Roisin. But yeah, I think just for us it was just that sense of anxiety and not knowing what we're going to face in the future, and how so many people are being putting out are in positions that they didn't or they wouldn't have expected to be in years ago, or in their lifetime even, perhaps being put out of their homes. And Rainey talked about Australia at the moment, and she's based over in Australia, and talked about the amount of people that are being put out because of the flooding in Sydney at the moment. So yeah, I mean, just that level of anxiety, and the amount of people that are put into positions that they didn't expect. So that was kind of a summary of our conversation.
Thank you, Sinead. How about any other group?
I speak for our group, Jennifer and Colleen. Yeah, I think we talked in terms of the feelings about anxiety, panic, overwhelm. Also, I thought what was really interesting was it came up, when people have tried to talk to loved ones about the issues, that maybe when they there's a lack of interest or they're shut down,
Yeah.
that can be very painful and disappointing. I think we've all had experiences of that. But we did talk about the positives in terms of actually turning that stress around into enjoying what we have now, and more focus on community group work. Would that be fair to say, Colleen and Jennifer? Is there anything else to add?
Maybe just about the positive experience of being in the community, for our own mental health, as well as the benefits of whatever the group is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very well said by both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one other group, briefly.
So I was talking to, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I was talking to Nuala and Justin, and I think we all kind of felt the same sort of feelings of, I guess, guilt, and some feelings of loss as well. And kind of when we're having those feelings, we were talking about, getting back into nature, and not to put them aside, but just to, kind of give yourself a moment. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, great. So yeah, it's, as I'm listening to people, I'm thinking, wow, it's great just to even talk, isn't it? It's great just to find people you can talk to about what you're experiencing, because it's not often that we can have those real conversations, because most of the time, as you mentioned, if you try to talk to the wrong person, you might get that shut down. So I think one of the things I said before was, trying to have the conversations to break the silence. But I think equally finding people that you can be completely upfront and honest with is really important as well. They're two very different things. So yeah, let me just go back to the last couple of slides. So we looked at the various ways to approach all of this stuff. And another just thing to add there is the balance. So I think the balance is really important. So you can, I don't think anyone in this group would be in this category, but a lot of people feel eco-anxiety, but they find it too overwhelming. So they push it away and go into maybe a bit of denial. It'll be grand, somebody else has sorted, you know, all that stuff couldn't possibly happen. And then there's the other side, which many of us have probably felt, is feeling the despair and feeling the too much responsibility, and then almost that leading to giving up in some cases, or burnout in others. So finding that middle ground where you know what you can do, you know that it's feeding yourself, that you're getting something positive out of what you're doing, you know, you're meeting your intrinsic needs, and it's at a level where you can sustain it. I think that kind of sweet spot is really important. I'm going to skim on. And then just lastly, yeah, we've got 1 minute left. So I just wanted to mention the course I'm running. Starts on Tuesday, the 6th of September. It runs from 6:30 to 8:30 every Tuesday for 8 weeks. And you can either join the live sessions every week or just sign up to the self-paced and get the recording sent to you if you can't make the Tuesday night. And what we're touching on in that course is kind of the back, you know, where are we at, big picture stuff. Why is sustainability not working? You know, going deeper into the systemic and inner and the cultural changes, the value changes that are needed. And then looking at this crisis of disconnection. So colonialism, capitalism, extractivism, patriarchy. So looking at those kind of cultural things that have led us to where we are now, and then looking at a roadmap of getting out of them based on regenerative movement, wisdom, nature-based solutions, natural principles, indigenous wisdom, and the creation of a life-sustaining culture. And then looking at activism in terms of like, what options are there, which ones suit which kind of personalities, how to find activism that really suits you, not burning out and stuff like that. Eco-resilience, you know, looking a bit about deep adaptation. I don't know if anyone has heard of that, but if you're interested in another approach, well, two actually, deep adaptation and deep transformation. Haven't got time to delve into that with you now, but just Google those two. So that's really what we cover. It's a bit about what is climate change and ecological breakdown, but it's more about the deeper inner world. And that's it. The other stuff I offer is work that reconnects, women's eco-harmony workshops. So that's a mixture of ecological stuff and singing, forest bathing, forest singing. Eco support circle is something that I want to set up, which would be online meetings, 1 or maybe 2 a month, short, sweet, discussing the issues and giving each other support in our work. And that's it. I'm going to stop the share. And maybe in our last minute, okay, we're over by 2 minutes, but I'd love if we could end just with, if anyone wants to unmute or pop in the chat, if this has been helpful, what are you feeling now? Just any last closing words, comments, sentences, that'd be amazing.
Just want to thank you so much, Rachel, for putting this on for us today. I think it was well needed, and it was really nice to see everybody's faces. And I want to wish Nuala the best of luck as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to everybody and to Rachel for hosting this. And you're very, very informative. You have a great grasp on the whole situation. So thanks. It's lovely to see other people here as well. That gives me, a sense of, I feel heartened by that. I really do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nuala. Thanks a million, yeah.
Yeah, Rachel, I love the way you, in that short period of time, went to so many different levels of our experience in relation to the planetary issues. And that I find very hopeful, because that's what we need, the deep dive.
Yeah, thanks.
Transformation to make the big changes.
Right. It very much was a taster, wasn't it? It was a kind of bit of everything in an hour. But that's was what it is.
Gracefully done. Great.
Thank you, Trish. Lovely to see you too.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. That was just what Trish said there. That was brilliant. You touched so much, but you managed to cover everything. And I think I've got so many takeaway messages from today. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Justin. Thank you. Yeah, it's very much scratching the surface of conversations that could be had, for many, many hours, isn't it? So, yeah, listen, I better leave you. I know you all have busy days, and what I'm intending to do is to edit the workshop if I can, the recording, so that everyone's privacy is respected, and then popping it up on my website with all of the resources, the links that are in the slide, so you have a little kind of package to come back to in terms of links, resources, and yeah, the little film as well. So keep in touch, and yeah, you have my website if you want to keep in touch with everything that I do. And thanks a million for turning up. I know how busy people are, and lovely to get your enthusiastic interaction as well. So thank you. Take care, all
Thank
of
you.
you. Look after
Bye,
yourselves.
Rachel.
Use your tools.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.